talking to Mike Oram, and this is a fascinating case in which Mike has had interaction with aliens, and this has started from a very young age. So this is the beginning of today's journey. Hi, this is Pierre Sabak, and today we're going to be speaking to Mike Oram. In particular, we're going to be looking at his book, Does It Rain in Other Dimensions? A True Story of Alien Encounters. And this is the book here. Right, first of all, I think, Michael, because this is a really interesting and a very complicated case, and what's fascinating about this particular case is that it goes all the way back into your early childhood. So I think the first thing that I want to do is to try and understand really where this began. So what was the first stage that you really had contact, or your first memories of these beings that in your book you describe as your space brothers? So if you could perhaps just give me a little bit of introduction.
Yes, okay. My earliest memory is I was 4 years old, which would have been 1955, living in the East End of London in a tiny little terraced house. We lived upstairs and my aunt and her family lived downstairs. All open plan, very small living room. I was standing talking to my mother, looking up at my mother, and what I told her, the words I'm going to use now are more or less the words that I used at that time. People have often said to me, how could a child of 4 use such terminology? The words just came into my head as I was telling my mother. So I started by saying to her that they were not my real parents. She was quite shocked. She stepped back and she said, well, of course we are. You were born in this house. And I said, well, you're my parents as far as bringing me onto this earth, but my real parents are somewhere out there in space. And I pointed up into the sky.
So was there just complete disbelief, or she just thought these were the imaginings of a child?
Well, there wasn't much time for her to think before I started telling her the next bit.
Right.
And I said to her that something of incredible importance is going to happen on this planet that will affect all units of consciousness, whether it was mineral, vegetable, animal or man. And I said, it will not happen in your lifetime, Mum, but it will happen in mine.
Are we talking about the advent of the computer, or are we talking about some kind of specific disaster or change within the environment?
What was revealed to me later on is that this incredible event that will affect all units of consciousness is an ascension of all consciousness on this planet, and the solar system and the sun. And I was actually told that the planets will go through the sun and ascend out of the 3D reality into a 4-dimensional experience.
Is this a deeper knowledge or a deeper understanding, or is this literally that when beings pass over spiritually that they then go into a new existence?
I was told that this is something that happens throughout the universe or universes, that it's just a progression of soul, of energy. And I'd come here at this time in my own little way, because there are many, many tens of thousands of people on this planet that are quite aware of what is happening. I was here to play my part in trying to get across to as many people as possible what is going to happen and how we should view that experience in ourselves at soul level.
Can I just ask a question here? So this is actually guaranteed, it is going to occur. It's not something that we all have to work towards, but you're actually saying that this is a foregone conclusion.
it's going to happen,
Right.
and all consciousness has to go with the planet, whatever it is, which is why I told my mother it was going to affect mineral, vegetable, animal and man.
And I think that's very interesting in terms of that you use units of consciousness as well. I think
this is the words that came out of my
It's a very
my
interesting choice of words.
Yes, I suppose it is now. I mean, my mum was quite baffled, but it wasn't just about coming here and trying to not really wake people up, but as I've always said in my talks, is that if you can just open that door a tiny, tiny bit and allow the light to flood through, it may not open any wider. It may open a lot wider, that's up to the individual, but it will never ever close again. But it's getting that door open.
I think the analogy to that would be, if a person becomes enlightened, then they can't actually become unenlightened. In fact, it's probably much more difficult to become unenlightened than what it is to become enlightened.
Well, I do agree with that. And although some people I've told, obviously it is difficult for people to accept, others have wondered, will they be going in this form? But we're leaving the 3D reality. We will not have form.
Right, so this is a very profound accent.
It's a profound change, and that's another reason why I'm here, because I wanted to be here to have this experience. I've been here a long while, as we all have, many lifetimes, and it is such an important part of our souls evolving.
Are we going to be at the same level as your space brothers in Telosh? Will we be able to communicate to them and be at their same level?
It'll be easier to communicate.
So you mean we're a nudge closer towards...
We're a nudge closer. This will be initially the fourth dimension. I think that, to me, I see it as a clearinghouse in a way, where we all carry karma. However good we may think we are, we all carry karma, and that has to be dealt with and cleared. And we should then, and it's up to each individual in their own time, move on to the fifth dimension. But my space brothers are actually in the sixth dimension. They are just energy, but they will come as an energetic form for me to see in 3D. So I've got something that I can actually see.
Are they solid, or is this more of an illusion, a perceptual
illusion? Well, it's not an illusion, it's just a more refined frequency. They're not solid in our sense of the word, in 3D.
Right, okay. So there are different levels to this in terms of how they manifest or how they appear.
Yes, and so I know when they're coming, I know when the craft are coming, I know when Telosh and the others are coming. Sometimes I can actually see them and people around me can't.
Yeah.
And it's the same with the craft.
And this is actually very common though, isn't it? I know within folklore, in terms of when an individual can see the fairies and other individuals can't, but of course you can have a group of people where two people can see them and two people can't. But in situations where perhaps you can actually see them, have you tried touching a person to see if you can transfer that sight?
No, I've never touched them. The only time is ever came that close, which is something we're going to talk about later, was when I was on the craft at Rachel in Nevada, and he placed that pink rose into my heart. His hand simply went straight through my body into the heart centre. And he created this pink rose out of the ether. It literally formed in front of my eyes, into this pink rose. But otherwise, we don't touch. No.
Some people might actually say, do you think the craft itself was physical, or were they taking you to a different dimension, or were they just taking your mind, so your body was here but you were sensing a different dimension? Or do you think you was on a physical craft and that your energy level was being matched to their energy level?
Yeah, no, I've been asked this so many times, understandably.
Yeah.
And even I don't know sometimes,
Right.
because sometimes it seems like I'm being taken physically, and there is a frequency change. Now, a lot of people don't like the frequency change. I used to just love this frequency change. And it starts off in the head. The vibration starts to get faster and faster and faster and faster. It quickly runs through the whole body. The whole body is vibrating so incredibly fast, which is the bit that I love.
Yeah.
And then I will literally just go off through the ceiling or through the window and up into the craft. Now, has my physical body gone with me? I don't truly know. It seems sometimes that it has, but other times it seems that I go in a more rarefied form.
Right, okay. So there is obviously an intrinsic part of consciousness which is a part of the interaction, but it does also seem to impact physiologically upon your environment. Probably we're looking here at both physical and conscious contact at some level.
At some level,
At
yes,
some level.
yes. I mean, I don't have all the answers.
No.
I don't even have 50% of the answers.
Yeah. I'd like to rein you in a little bit and go back into your childhood. So we mentioned that basically you had this experience where you spoke to your mother, and you mentioned that you were here to assist people in a sense, to assist them with this ascension process, to get people psychologically aware of this process, or for people to be spiritually aware, or to open up to the possibility that
To open their mind to the greater reality.
to the greater
Now,
reality.
For anyone listening, I do have to be aware of the ego part. This is not ego. I'm a very tiny, small fish in a massive ocean. I'm
Yeah.
just playing my very
Yeah.
small part, doing my little bit. It's nothing special.
I mean, after you came out with those profound revelations, did that impact in terms of your relationship with your parents?
Yes, my dad, when I was talking to you earlier, actually told you that I used to call him a reliable plodder. He was a very, very lovely man. He was in the Second World War. His father died in the trenches in the First World War when my father was 4 years old. He came out of the war with a demob suit and I think £100 or something, and they had to start their life then. Really, nothing else to go on, so that's when they rented this place in Stratford. I never really spoke to my dad about these experiences, and I don't think my mum would have done, but I had a different connection to my mother.
Right.
And I somehow used to think that she knew more than what she let on. And I reckon even when I was in my 30s and 40s, I would still say to her, "You know why I'm here. You know why I've come here through your line." And she used to say, "I don't understand what you're saying." And I said, "But you do know, you just choose not to tell me." And she would always end this conversation, she would just say with a little glint in her eye, "Well, just remember I'm the seventh child of a seventh child." And she would leave it there.
What was her lineage?
Well, her mother was Irish, and she used to talk to me about the little people and how she used to see them, so there may have been a connection there.
Were there any specific stories which stand out?
One I always remember with my nan, and she was a lovely lady, that one of her experiences when she was living in Ireland was that she was walking along this little country lane, and she suddenly saw this man sitting on a 5-bar gate, and it was so typical. it would be easy for people to laugh and not accept it, because you read about this story so much in books. He looked like a typical sort of gnome. The way he was dressed, with his hat slightly pointed, and he actually doffed his hat as she went by, and he said, I can't do the Irish accent, but he sort of said to her, good morning, madam. And she turned round and she asked who he was, and he didn't really say, apart from, I'm one of the little people. And she turned back, and then she turned back again, and he was gone.
Right.
And I was fascinated as a child with this. And another experience when I was very young, around that time, was that we'd built a snowman in the garden, and myself and my dad and my sister, and we came upstairs to look at it from what they called in those days the scullery, which was an old name for the kitchen, and that looked out onto the backyard stroke garden. And we were looking, the three of us, down at the snowman, and then all of a sudden this tiny fairy, possibly about a foot, 1 foot, whatever that is in me.
Size of a doll, really, isn't it?
And she was dressed in like a silver garment, and she even had a wand with 5 stars on the top, and she was literally skipping, jumping and skipping around this snowman. Well, the snowman. And this was utterly fascinating. But we never spoke about it afterwards. We didn't seem to, with lots of things, you saw something unusual and you don't mention it.
Some people talk about, after having supernatural experiences or experiences with aliens and with fairies as well, that there's often an ambivalence. Do you think that it was an ambivalence which was psychologically induced, or do you think it was more the atmosphere within the house, that these strange things that occur, okay, they occur, but we just don't talk about them? How would you interpret that?
Yeah, there's many different experiences at different levels, different parts of my consciousness. So it's difficult to answer that question that you're saying, but I'll tell you another strange experience that happened in around 1959, 8 years old. We had a 6-week summer holidays from school. It was the very first day of my summer holidays. I've got a ringing in my ear now. The whole thing is rather weird because I was ill, and I remember being in bed, and my local doctor came every day and injected me with a needle in the backside. Sometimes there were 2 men that came with her and stood looking at the bottom of the bed. I had to eat this strange little brown tiny ball bearing type something, and this long wormy type something. It might have been fibre, but why there was 2 different types, I really don't know. I mean, I'm 8 years old, and my mum had to feed this to me. It was ghastly trying to swallow it. Every 3 hours around the clock, right through the night. I asked my mother many, many times what was going on then. She said, well, you were very ill. And I said, what was wrong with me? She said, well, at one point we thought you were dying. So I said, well, if you thought I was dying and I was that seriously ill, why wasn't I taken to hospital? And she said, because there was no room. Okay, so I said, well, what was going on, what was wrong with me. She said there was something inside you that had to come out. And she said that I wasn't able to go to the toilet, I don't think. And my mum said when I did go to the toilet, she had to look. She had to look for something specific. So I said, well, what was it? And she said, a tree was growing inside you. I said, a tree? She said, yes, an orange tree. I said, why? She said, you must have swallowed a pip. Now, that scared me so much when I was 8. I never ate oranges for years.
Right.
Because I was so afraid of swallowing another pip. I didn't see the nonsense of it at that age. But the thing is, this went on, and I find this strange, because it started on the first day of my 6-week holiday, and it ended on the last day of my 6-week holiday, when something finally came out. And I said to her, what did it look like? And she said, well, it was like a long branch. That's the later one. She said it was like a long branch that had roots on it and twigs that came off the sides. And she said it was growing inside you. And I said, well, what did you do with it? And she said, I had to give it to the 2 men. And I questioned you about this for years.
The doctor who was involved in your case, I mean, was this the local GP?
This was the local GP.
Right.
And she came, say, every morning and injected me in the backside. Sometimes these 2 men came and just observed. Now, the interesting thing about this, I'd never forgotten that, of course. Many years later, this would have been in the 1990s, I was outside. It was a very, very hot day, and I just had my shorts on, and I was cleaning the car. And I was kneeling down, cleaning one of the wheels, when my neighbour came home from work. And she got out of her car and came over and said hello. And she said to me, what's that lump on your back? It was possibly about the size of it was bigger than a 10p piece in today's 10p. And it was quite raised up. And I said to her, oh, I don't know. I said, it's been there for several years. I said, I've shown it to a couple of doctors. They didn't have a clue what it was. And they just said, it must be a cyst of something. And she said, there's a tiny little black thing right in the centre of it. She said, I think it's a blackhead. I said, a blackhead? She said, yeah. So she said, do you want me to try and get it out for you? So I said, okay. And she was pressing, felt like with her 2 thumbnails together, pressing really hard.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden she said, oh, it's just popped out a bit. I think I can just get hold of it. And she started pulling and pulling and pulling and pulling. And then I just heard her say, oh my God, what the hell is this? And I turned round and it was shaped like that. See that there?
A tree branch-like structure.
Branch-like structure. It was damp because it had come out from inside my body, but in the hot sun, it dried incredibly quickly, and it folded up into almost like a little springy circle.
Yeah.
I took it indoors, into the bathroom, and I put it on the shelf on a bit of tissue. And I went to get a clean jar, honey jar I think it was. And I brought that back and I thought I'll put it in there and see what I can find out about it. I was just going to drop it into the jar when I suddenly turned away. I couldn't stop myself, over to the toilet, dropped it down the toilet and flushed the toilet.
So the evidence disappeared.
And it had gone. But the thing was, I then thought back to 1959 when I asked my mother what it was, and she said it was like a twig, a branch with little roots coming out the sides,
Yeah.
which is what that is. Now, about 3 or 4 years later from this experience, I saw this brilliant film by Steven Spielberg and others called Taken. It's 10 episodes, I think, on 6 DVDs about 2 families who are taken through generations. And at the start of each episode, there's the same images that run. And on one of those, it's where they are taking an implant out of a man's head and they put it onto the desk, and it's identical to that.
Right.
Slightly damp as well, and it folded up.
Coils around.
Just like mine did.
Yeah.
And that was
Was
an
it,
alien implant in that film.
okay, so was that some type of tracking or communication device?
Yes.
Presumably of some time.
I don't know. It could have been either of those, really.
Right.
Now, I mean, just very quickly, about 9 years ago, I went to see a consultant about, I've got 3 ruptured discs in the base of my spine when I saved someone's life when I was just 17. And he wanted to do, I had a neurological problem in latter years because of that. And I asked if an operation could be done. They've always said in the past it was too dangerous, and I thought I would try again because they had new technology. So I went to see this man, and he said, right, well, what we want to do is put you through an MRI scanner and scan your brain. So I said, okay. And he said, have you got any metal objects in you at all? Now, I was only joking, but I said to him, well, I've got an alien implant in my brain. So, and he was writing on the, and he just lifted his eyes up and looked at me. He didn't say a word.
Right.
And then he carried on writing. And he said, you'll get an appointment. And I went for this appointment. They never cancelled it. I went back to Preston Hospital, I think it was. And they said, oh, the consultant has decided that he doesn't want to scan your brain. And I said, what about, see about this operation? They said, no, that's it. You can go home. So it made me wonder, why was that because of what I told him? Did I spook him out? I don't know. But anyway, that's that. But
yeah, I'm thinking that the subject of the ostensibly what appears to be some type of implant, and your first implant occurred at what age was you when you was it?
Well, it was
when you was a child.
When I was a child, it was 1959, so I was 8.
You were 8 years old. Can I just ask, were there experiences before this implant, or did things speed up, or did things change in any way after the implant had been removed, or was it just there didn't seem to be a correlation, you were just unwell for a period of time and life just moved on? Did you notice some type of difference as a result?
Life moved on, but I carried on having experiences,
Right.
quite prolific at times.
So what was your, if you like, your next set of experiences which were really defining for you as a child?
Yes, defining. The next one would be with this this green stone that I found. Now, where I lived in Stratford in the East End of London, there was a place called Temple Mills. There was a temple there in the past. And there was Hackney Marshes, and as kids we just loved to go over. Dangerous place really, but we used to go over onto the Hackney Marshes. And I met Telosh there once when I was Telosh, my space brother. This was when we were messing around on this dangerous river, the River Lee, in the industrial part of the River Lee, and we were messing around this old rowing boat, and for a couple of hours trying to get it seaworthy. It was starting to get dark when I was with three friends were with me, and they decided to take the boat out. 3 of them got in, and I was about to step in. I was already standing in thick mud, and I had this overwhelming feeling like someone was saying to me, do not get into that boat. So I just said to them, I'm not going. And they said, oh, okay, and push us out. Now, do you know, I found that so scary, because I pushed them out into this quite fast flowing, dirty river, and they disappeared into the dusk. They didn't even have oars, and I couldn't swim, and nor could one of the other lads on the boat.
Instantly compromised.
Absolutely. And I suddenly thought, I've got to go right across Hackney Marshes, and it's getting quite dark. We'd totally lost track of time. We'd been out since about 10 in the morning. I actually arrived home at 10 p.m. and I was trying to walk up to get onto the marshes, and I thought, I'm really scared here. There was lots of dangerous bits that you could fall into, etc. I don't know how I'm going to do it. And Telosh appeared. Now, Telosh will only appear if it's absolutely necessary or important, if he's got something to tell me or whatever. And he appeared, and he was standing there, and he's got these brilliant blue eyes, and wearing this silver suit that he projects himself in. It seems to just glow and light up. And I could have cried at that moment. But he said to me, just remember, I'm only a thought away.
So you are connected telepathically?
Yeah. And the next moment, I found myself on the road, the lane, Temple Mills Lane. That was the next moment. I had to sort of establish myself to where am I? And then, of course, I quickly realised where I was.
So there was a missing time? Yeah.
We had no idea what the time was. It was getting dark fast for some reason. And from there, I ran all the way home, non-stop, about a mile. All the mums were out on the pavement in a group talking. They were about to call the police. And then Mum said it's 10 o'clock at night. And all the mums were furious. And I went indoors, and I thought Mum was going to really give me a severe telling off. And she said, I'm very proud of you. So I said, proud? Well, why? And she said, well, because you didn't get in that boat, because I told them the whole story. Yeah. The mothers were petrified once I told them where their sons were, gone off into the darkness in a boat with no oars. And she said, and you didn't, you were sensible enough not to go. Well, I was told not to go, but I found out the next morning that they were going along in the dark, and they heard this rushing water, and it was a weir, and they were heading straight towards it. One of them, who couldn't swim, was crying, and the boat was leaking, and they had a can, luckily, in there, and they were trying to scoop water out. The elder one grabbed hold of a branch, and he was managing to hold on to it to stop the boat going any further, and they was shouting out, and a man going to work got a rope and threw it over the bridge, and they all just sort of lifted themselves out. But they said if I'd been on it, the extra weight, it would have sunk. So it was really, really strange. But in that spot, is where I found the green stone. Now, it was it shouldn't have been where I'd found it. There's a large area there of football fields, and they all sort of amalgamate into one with just the white lines that would separate them.
pitches.
And the balls are always going over into the next place, and it was a very popular place. There was possibly 8-9 football matches going on at any one time. Well, I was walking across there shortly after this experience with a friend of mine on a weekday, so it was empty. Walking across one of the playing fields, and I practically stood on this large piece of rock with it was like a large cube of emerald that was embedded half in the rock and half out. Now, it's only recently, all these years later, I found this book, Esoteric Psychology by Dr. Douglas Baker, and in here, this is I've tried to find this image, and I've never been able to, but this is identical to what I found with this large emerald coming out of this rock. Now, the interesting thing about this is I took it home. As soon as I held it in my hand, something was happening to my consciousness. It was a totally different frequency. It was almost like it was changing my frequency. I showed it to my mate, my friend, and I said, look at this.
Did he notice anything strange about it?
He wasn't even interested. Right. He just said, yeah. And I said, no, but look at it. You know, do you want hold it? He said, no, hold that. So I took it home, showed it to Mum and Dad. I took it into my bedroom, and I would sit on the bed and hold it, and really I was meditating. I perhaps didn't realise that, but I was just quite in my mind with it, and it was connecting me to my space brothers.
So it was no coincidence that you found this rock. It was put there in front of your pathway so that you could...
It had to have been. It should never have been where it was.
Can I just ask, you know, the previous time when you saw Telos, was that the first time that you saw him as a man? Because I know that there'd been incidents in your book, Does It Rain in Other Dimensions, when you mentioned that he'd appeared like a tiger and that he would appear as an animal when you were much younger. So was that really the first time when he saved your life?
No, I met him before that. When I was a couple of years young, I was about 7. That was the first time I actually saw him. I woke up in the night in bed, and he was standing at the bottom of the bed.
Was he again in a similar type?
He was as he always is.
Right.
And I obviously freaked out a bit. I sat up and I was pushing my back against the wall, and I asked what he wanted. And he came over and he lifted the sheet off my bed, and I just jumped out of bed, run round him, run into the living room, which was where my mum and dad slept, and told them there was a strange man in the room. And my dad picked up the poker, quickly followed by my mother, and they went into the room, and they eventually came back out and said, there's no one there, you must have been dreaming. And I said, well, I know I wasn't dreaming, but anyway, I left it at that. But in the morning, there was this strange card on the bed. It was like the size of a business card, but it had it wasn't velvet, but it had a strange type of soft feel to it. And there were various planets on this card.
From the solar system, or...?
Well, I thought that at the time, that it was the solar system.
But you might have been jumping prematurely to a conclusion.
Might have been. And there was a picture of him on the other side.
His calling card.
His calling card.
Yeah.
And, well, again, I showed it to my mum. I treasured it. And It came a couple of more times from memory, but I used to come home from school. And the first thing I done was got my green stone, sat on the edge of the bed, and meditated to make contact with who I called my real family, which is what I told my mum. My real family was in space. One day I came home from school and I couldn't find the green stone, and I went and asked my mum if she had seen it, and she said, to my horror, more than horror, I mean, I was absolutely devastated, she says she threw it away.
Right.
First thing I thought of was the dustbin, so I said, well, I'm going to go and get it back. You should never have done that. And she said, I've put it where you will never find it. And I said, why? And she said, because since you brought that stone home, these people or this man have been coming into our home. So I've thrown it away, and I also threw away the card.
So that was done simultaneously?
Yeah, same time.
Right. So she saw the connection between the two? Right?
Well, she put it down to that,
yeah,
to the green stone.
So again, that's almost conceding that, particularly with the calling card, that there was perhaps something really going off which was very difficult to explain. Do you feel that your mother was uneasy by that, or was she terrified? I mean,
It was difficult to know if she was uneasy or whether she knew, because I used to say to her, you know what's going on. You know why I'm here. So I could never really say, even in my 20s and 30s, I still used to ask her.
I mean, did you get frustrated by this type of intervention? I know in a sense that your parents were just concerned for your well-being, but did that really frustrate you in a sense, because you felt that could there have been some kind of jealousy or rivalry? It's almost like he's my boy and you're not going to take him away, almost.
Well, it could have been that, because I mean, things might have been going on with me that she was aware of, but I wasn't.
Yeah.
But I don't have the answers to
No.
that. All I know is that that stone was important to me, and I was truly devastated, and I can still feel the effects even today.
When you say with the stone that you used it to communicate, was it just that it seemed to be that Telosh would just appear more often, or did you really feel that you could speak your inner thoughts to the stones and that there was some kind of telepathic communication?
I wasn't aware of telepathic communication, but it was the energy of this stone that seemed to make a connection to the system where I came from, and which I suppose I can say now is a Syrian system, but I've never mentioned that before.
So this is the first time publicly that you've acknowledged on camera that
Yes,
your origin comes from the Syrian
system. It's where
So that's a very big admission. Why do you think you kept that out of the public? Was it just something incredibly personal, or do you feel that it wasn't something that was necessary to tell the story?
No, it was personal.
Right, okay.
Yeah, it was quite personal, really. But perhaps it's time to say. We are in very important times now with this ascension process.
Yeah. Can I just ask about, did you always know this in terms of that you were from Sirius, or was this something that you learned relatively late?
No, I knew when I was 4 years old.
Okay. Right.
I just don't talk about it, really. Well, I mean, my dad, I don't even know whether my mother even talked to my dad about it. I know he went running in there with a poker, but I don't think he would have questioned.
No, he would have seen it more in
as a
literal
dream,
sense.
having a nightmare or something.
Yeah.
And I didn't talk to him about it. There is an experience that we'll talk about shortly, but the next significant moment in my life was when I was 17, so that would have been 1968, 69.
Okay.
I was probably coming up to on the cusp of 17, 18. And I had a job as a delivery man for a bakery called Wonderloaf. For those that can remember Wonderloaf, it was a blue wrapper. And the van was dressed up looking like a Wonderloaf. And I got the job when I was 17. And one day I used to go, at one point of the journey, I used to go down a cul-de-sac, and I would stop the van there, deliver to the house on the right hand side. I was facing the park in front, which then looked out over to the main road and Beckton power station. And I used to stop there and have a sandwich and a cup of tea from the flask.
Was this early in the morning then?
This was, yes, the sky was absolutely blue, but it hadn't quite risen. And before I left home that morning, I said to Mum, I'm going to see a flying saucer today. And she just calm, she didn't question anything, she just calmly said, we'll take your camera. And I said to her, no, don't be silly, it's just imagination. And then I stopped down the cul-de-sac this time. I'd taken the bread to the lady on the right, and I was sitting looking out the window, and this huge cigar-shaped object, a brilliant orange.
When you say huge...
Well, I worked out in the end when I met Charles Bowen, who was editor of Flying Saucer Review at the time, that it was over a mile in length. It could have been 2 miles, but it was certainly over a mile in length.
So at least the size of a football field.
It was huge. It was taking up a huge part of the sky. And it was coming towards me at a slight angle, and I was watching it, and then it started to stop over Beckton Power Station, and it swung round so I could see it end on. Right. And it was just tapered a bit at each end. I jumped out the van at that point, and I was standing in the middle of the road. I had an half-eaten sandwich in the left hand and the flask of a cup of tea in the right hand, and my head was locked looking up at this object. It was just incredible. It seemed to slightly turn on its axis, almost like you could see what might have possibly have been windows.
Right. So what was your emotion? I mean, was you gobsmacked? Was you excited? Or was it just a strange...
At that moment, I was so interested about looking at this object.
Right, so you're critically just trying to keep a note of it.
I was keep a note of it, but a part of my consciousness went into this craft, as weird as it sounds. And one of the people on that craft, I don't remember seeing them, but someone spoke to me telepathically and said, this experience is just for you. Now the reason that was said is, just before that, I knew that I could hear the milk float coming, and he used to come up the cul-de-sac and stop near my bread van, and he used to go into the park to go into the public convenience. So I'm standing in the middle of the road with my head locked looking up into the sky with this sandwich and cup of tea. He walked right past my shoulder and said, "Morning, Baker," and I couldn't answer him. And I thought, well, look back, look where I'm looking, look where the angle of my head, look into the sky. And he went into the toilet, and I thought, well, when he comes back out, if I'm still there, which I was, he's got to stop and think and look back and think, what the hell is he looking at? But he didn't. He walked past, almost robotic. He didn't even glance at me. He just walked straight past and got in his milk float, turned it around, and when he went round the corner, that's when they said to me, this experience is just for you. And then I fully came back into my body. I found out later that this lady was looking out the window at me, wondering what on earth I was doing. But she said, I never thought of looking up into the sky. This was when an investigator went to her house. So anyway, that's when I got excited.
Were there multiple witnesses, or was this...
No, there was just me.
There was just you, yeah.
I was so incredibly excited. I mean, I was young. I didn't know what to do. Now, I had the Daily Mirror with me. So I thought, I'll ring the Daily Mirror. And I rang the Daily... There was a telephone box opposite. I rang the Daily Mirror and I said to him, I've just seen this incredible craft in the sky. I said, it's huge. I said, it was taking up a huge part of the sky. People are going to work. There must be loads of people that can see it. It's a clear blue sky.
Right.
And her attitude was, oh, don't call us, we'll call you.
Right, okay.
And I remember just slamming the phone down in anger.
Yeah, total frustration.
And I got back into the van and I turned it around and I went to the next house and this elderly lady answered the door and she said to me, ah, my goodness, Baker, you look like you've just seen a ghost. She
Right.
said, you can't drive the van in that condition. Come inside. And I said to her, but I've just seen this huge, I called it a flying saucer, I've just seen this huge flying saucer. I said, it took up the whole part of the sky, it was incredible. My mind went into this object. I said, you just come inside, Baker. You come, sit down, I'll make you a nice cup of tea. And I said, but I've just seen this huge craft in the sky. My mind, I said, it's gone inside it. And she said, I'll tell you what, Baker, I'll make you a cup of tea. He said, you can't drive that van in this condition. I'm going to ring your boss. And she rang him and said, I wasn't feeling well. He had to come out with a relief driver. Then I started to come back down to earth, and I thought, I can't tell them why they've got to come out and bring me back home because I've just seen this huge flying saucer in the sky. I'll lose my job. So when they came, I said that I wasn't feeling well. And I went home and I told Mother what had happened. And Mum just said, well, go over and get a paper and see if there's anything in it where you can write to, not the Daily Mirror, obviously. And I think it was the Telegraph. We weren't Telegraph people, but that's the one I picked up. And there was a man in there who was a science correspondent. This is synchronicity. His name was Robert Chapman. And he had just brought out a book called UFO. In fact, I've got a copy over there somewhere. I wrote to him about it. He wrote back and he said, it's fascinating. I've passed it on to Charles Bowen, who's editor of Flying Saucer Review. And Charles got in touch with me and he asked if I would meet him in London at Dr. Bernard Finch's house, who was also one of the consultants on FSR.
Right.
And it came out in this magazine, which was March-April 1970. That's the front cover. And from that, a friend, well, it wasn't a friend then, he found out where I lived. His name was John Bennett. Two people came. One was Graham Cowell and another man came called John Bennett. And it was John Bennett that went to her house and questioned this lady, and that's when she said that she had saw me standing there. And the first one that came, Graham Cowell, he said to me, he used to write a magazine called Perception, and he said to me, have you ever been to Warminster? And I said, no. What's Warminster? He said, oh, you've got to go. This is where it's all happening at the moment. You know, there's loads of people go down there. So I went down there with him. Now, this was the big moment, because I used to think I was the only person in the world that was seeing these spaceships and talking to these occupants.
Right, okay.
Because
yeah, you had a very sheltered existence.
I had a sheltered existence, I hadn't been anywhere.
Yeah.
Mum and Dad,
Weren't that eager for you to talk about it that much?
well, they didn't even talk about it.
No.
My dad never had a car, you know.
Yeah.
We didn't really go anywhere, and he said, "Well, look, let's go next weekend." Wiltshire. That's the furthest I'd ever been, and went up Cradle Hill on a Saturday night, and this was it. There must have been 200 people at the top of this hill. This was a life-changing moment because I realised I wasn't alone anymore.
Right.
And there was lots of people that were either seeing or were interested in the subject.
I mean, being a young person and having what were actually very remarkable and profound experiences, did you find that you almost became a personality cult, that there were people who just wanted to hang out with you just because of who and what you were in terms of your communications with these different types of beings?
Well, yeah, that happened in Warminster because I started going down about every second weekend in the end, and I was having some of the most amazing experiences of my life. I preferred to be on my own at Star Hill rather than with the masses up Cradle, but it was also nice to be with them because they were a nice bunch of people. But at that time, I was seeing so many things, or I would be told to go somewhere at a certain time and the craft would appear. I don't know why, unless something happened on a deeper level. Now, to the point where people used to say to me up on Cradle Hill, "Let me know when you're coming back down, because when you come down, we start seeing things." Not that they weren't before, they were, and had been for, I think, since Christmas Day 63, I think it was, or 5. Yes, but no, I mean, I wasn't like, people, I suppose some people were magnetically drawn, but that, I don't think that was in an egoic way, because we were all searching for truth.
Yeah.
And what was going on.
Yeah. So what type of sightings did you have which really stood out then?
One of the major ones.
Right.
Yes, right. Star Hill. For those that know, not many people used to go to Star Hill. It was the other side of the town of Warminster, and you drove up this long, narrow lane right down to the bottom where you couldn't go any further because you came up against Salisbury Plain, which was military. Yeah, I mean, obviously you've got to always bring that into the picture with the amount of craft that was seen. It's a vast military area. And there was a barn at the bottom, and the farmer was really friendly, and sometimes he'd come down late at night, ask if we'd seen anything. He was really a nice man, until one day some bright spark decided to burn the barn down, and no one was allowed to go down there again. He blocked off the drive, which was very, very sad. But there was an experience, actually, it's before this one, so I was just going to put that to the side for 1 minute. I'd gone down here with my friend John Bennett, who was the second man that came to my home from that experience.
Were they writing books, or were they just researching?
They were no researchers. Graham had his own magazine called Perception. Yeah. I went down. I was going for a whole week. I couldn't believe it because before you just went from Friday to Sunday and you had to drive back home, be at work on Monday. But we decided to have a week's holiday there. So me and John Bennett drove down there, and synchronistically we met another friend of ours. We didn't know he was going to be there. He was there for a few days, Chris Trubridge, and we decided to go to Star Hill, and the car was backed up to the barn. The car was facing down the fields towards Scratchbury Hill, one of the ancient hill forts, Battlesbury and then Scratchbury Hill. And we were just talking, sitting in the car talking. Now we knew in the dip, beyond the end of this first large field, that there was a farmhouse. And sometimes you could just see top light of the house room, might be in the bathroom or something, come on and perhaps go off again. You can only see a bit of the house because it was in a dip. And we was just sitting in the car talking, and we decided to drive round to Imba, which is a village that the military basically took off the people, so they wanted to use it. And we drove round there, and as we were approaching, there were two houses on the left. We decided to drive out to Imba, and there was a red light in the sky, and it was following the contours of the hills as it was going along. We jumped out the car. There was a farmer in his garden, and we said to him, look at this light. And it split into 3 red lights, and they all shot off in different directions.
Right,
Before they'd done that, he'd run indoors and brought out his wife and his daughter who had a baby in her arms, and we were all watching this, and he said, I've heard so much about them, never seen one before. Anyway, we then went back round and parked up at Star. And the car was facing down the field, and all of a sudden, been there about 10 minutes, a light appeared at the end of the field, and then it seemed to be turning. We jumped out the car and we're standing there, and then it went up into the air. 2 more lights came up with it, forming like a triangle. It went several feet above the ground. At that point, we decided to run across the field to try and meet it, basically.
Yeah.
It was dark, and we were running quite fast. We got about 1/3 of the way into the field, and Chris said, there's adders in this field. Now, we had no fear at all running towards what might have been an extraterrestrial vehicle. He mentioned adders, and we turned round and ran back.
Right.
Seemed rather bizarre. But we did, and we watched it from back at the car. And it started to come towards us. And I got the car headlights on full beam, and I was flashing the car headlights at it, and we were waving, and then it stopped, and it went back down again, the way it came up.
Do you think that did this almost come from the earth, just out from?
Well, it looks like it's coming out the earth, but there's a hollow there, you see.
So it could have been the elevation.
So it could have been coming up out the
Yeah.
hollow. And we drove round there. I remember we woke all the pigs up, and they were onking away, and we thought the farmer's going to be, another
Massive
farmer
place.
was going to be pretty annoyed. But you could feel the excitement in the air, because we knew we was really close to where this vehicle must have been, but we gave up with all the pigs waking up, and we went back to Star Hill. Anyway, to move on with this, we were back there the next night, and this red light came back, the one that broke into 3, or it was similar, and it followed the contours of the hill, and it went up to what they called the top of Star Hill, where there's a burial mound, and small lights would come out of it, and one would come down and land in front of us, one would come out behind us, one would come out up near the lane, which was our only exit. And once they landed, these lights, they went out, so you couldn't really see them anymore. Nothing happened for about, 45 minutes. So John said, well, let's drive up to Cradle Hill. But as we were driving up the little track, we'd gone over the little humpback bridge where the railway line is. Now, this was the old days when it was just filament light bulbs on the headlamps of the car. And he had the lights on full beam, and they suddenly got so incredibly bright that all 3 of us had to shield our eyes from the brightness. Now, we thought it was the headlights, but Chris, who was sitting in the back, he said it's this, whatever it is, this light shone through the hedge.
Right.
So we stopped the car. It was decided that I'd get out and have a look. I was a little bit wary. Couldn't see over the hedges anyway, so we carried on back up to Cradle Hill. There was no one up there, so we came back eventually, and I'm missing some little bits out here now because of time, but we stayed there another couple of hours, but nothing happened. But we went back the next couple of nights, and the same thing happened, where it was stopping over the top of the burial mound on top of Star Hill. So we decided the next night we'd go on top the burial mound and wait for it to come, and that's what we done. And sure enough it came, but it came from a different direction. It came from the Longleat direction out in the more open plain near Clay Hill, and it was hurtling towards us, but it was 10 times bigger. It was huge.
Was this because you were closer to it?
I don't know, actually, but it was huge, and it was coming towards us at really quite a fast speed. And I said to Chris, he had the camera, I said, don't take a photo until it stops over the top of us. And he didn't wait, and he took a photo, but as soon as he clicked the photo, that object
It just switched
just disappeared.
Yeah.
And 5 minutes after that, a car came screaming along the little track. There was 4 friends in it who were down for the weekend. They'd been up on Cradle Hill and they were so excited. They said, did you see this big red globe? It just went out in the sky. You must have seen it. Well, we thought we were onto something really big, so we tried to just play it down. And we just, we sort of saw it, you know. And they eventually went back to Cradle Hill, and we carried on our... Once we stayed up on the hill for the next night, but it didn't come back. Once we came back down, it came back. So all these things were happening, and then I went back home that Sunday night, burst through the front door. Mum and Dad would normally be in bed, but they wanted to wait to make sure I got home safely. Because I just blurted it out in front of the two of them, this incredible week we just had. My dad looked at me like I was losing my mind. My mum found it more interesting. And because he didn't believe me, and this is where I move on to this next experience, I sat in meditation because I thought that, well, they tell me to go somewhere at a certain time, so I'm going to ask them. So I asked if they would come for my dad. I wanted my dad to see one. I needed him to be convinced. So I sat in meditation on and off for a few days anyway. And at the time I worked at the Ford Motor Company in Dagenham on a 3-shift system, and this particular week I was on night work. So I went to bed at 3 in the afternoon, and Mum woke me up at 9 o'clock. In the evening I'd have something quick to eat and get to work for 10. But this evening I woke up about 8 o'clock, say, and they said to me, go and look out your parents' bedroom window. So I got up, went through looked out the window. Hovering over the house was this huge silver globe, and there was energy just sort of coming off it, like electrical energy.
Did you feel any static or electricity?
I didn't feel any static, no, but I ran downstairs. Mum was in the kitchen preparing my evening meal. Dad was sitting in the armchair, and I said to him, would you like to see one of these flying saucers, Dad? And sort of tongue-in-cheek, he said, yeah, I wouldn't mind, son. I said, well, go and open the front door and have a look. And he opened the front door, stepped outside, looking up at this object. Well, he just shouted at me, go and get the binoculars, go and get the binoculars, he said. And I thought, wow, that's exciting for my dad. I went and got the binoculars, and he was looking at it in the sky, just hovering over the house. And then I thought to myself, well, it's waiting quite a while in a built-up area. And then it started to move. And as it was going over the apex of the roof of the house opposite, my dad then ran upstairs. Quick, quick, he said, upstairs, upstairs. And I followed him up there. He raced across their bedroom to the window. And one thing he'd never done with my mum is touched her curtains, because she always knew the curtains and the net curtains were tampered with. And I was always moving them and always trying to put them back in exactly the same place so she wouldn't notice, but she always noticed. But my dad, it was more than his life was worth to tamper with the curtains. But today he practically ripped them off the rails in his excitement, flung open the window, and this object went over to the River Thames, about a mile away. You can just see it twinkling under the lights, and you could see the light reflecting in the top of the water. It stayed there for a few seconds, and then it just moved back slowly and stopped, waited a few seconds, and then it just shot off into the sky at the most incredible speed, so fast that my dad said, well, where's it gone? And I said, it's just shot up into the sky. Well, He never talked about it again.
I was just going to say, did this initiate some type of personality change? But
Yeah.
there was complete denial.
It must have been some sort of denial. It's obviously
Right.
something he didn't want to deal with, I should think, until quite a few years later, when he was in a home. He was dying basically. Mum had already passed on a few years before, and I'd come down. I went down on the train because I was driving up and down 300 miles up and down the motorway like a yo-yo at the time, and he was in the hospice. I went on the train, and I went in to see him, and he just didn't look like my dad. They'd propped him up in bed. His face was definitely white and sunken, and I tried to have a conversation with him. Now he could always talk about the war, but he didn't. He couldn't even do that. So I just sat there, and then in the end I said to him, well, I've got to go, Dad. I've got to get the train back up north. And as I was leaving, I kissed him on the forehead, and as I was leaving the room, he just suddenly said to me, do you remember that light? So I turned round, I came back in and sat down, and I said, what light, Dad? He said, the light that hovered over our house. This is the first time he really spoke.
This was the first acknowledgement on his deathbed.
And I'd been there about 2 hours. And so I sat down, I said, well, tell me about it. And he did. He went through the whole story. But they said to me, what I forgot to say is when we were watching it, when we were outside the house looking up at it, they said to me that, because when I said to them, you're waiting quite a long while in this built-up area, they said, we are waiting long enough for your dad to fully take it into his consciousness what he is experiencing, so he will never forget it. And he did obviously never forget it. So he told me this story, and I then kissed him again, and I said, I've got to go now, love you, Dad, and I went. I drove home, got the train home, but about 5 o'clock in the morning, the hospice rang to say that he had died that night. So that was the last conversation we had about this incredible experience. So I think it did touch him, but he just couldn't go there for whatever reason.
Just when it was time to leave, almost, when you're just walking out the door, he just had to broach the subject. He felt, I have to talk about this because this is my last time that I'm going to be able to speak to them.
Yeah, and he must have known how important this stuff was to me, because I spent my lifetime doing this.
I'm sure you mentioned in the book somewhere that when you went to Star Hill or Cradle Hill, that you had some kind of encounter, or that there was this shadowing or footsteps.
Yes, not. Several people had heard. They used to call it the invisible walker, and you could be sitting in the car, you could be standing there. I heard it twice. Once when I was with my friends, my dear friends at the time, really, we were standing by the edge of the cornfield, and you could hear it walking through right in front of you, just like someone walking through. You couldn't see anybody.
So
Another
like
time,
an invisible person almost.
well, exactly, yes, what they call it, the invisible walker, and several people would hear it come up and walk around the car. And it happened to us when the three of us were in the car, and it came up and walked around the car and stopped by the window where I was sitting.
Did it spook you out in any way?
Well, it's a bit spooky. I think if you was on your own, you might perhaps struggle to deal with it. But there was three of us there, but we didn't get out of the car until you hear it wander off. Never knew what that was or what that was about, really. But I did have an experience in 1970 with a landed craft.
In the same location?
At Star Hill, my favourite spot. Well, it looked like a bright star, much larger than, say, Sirius.
So this was in the evening then?
This was in the evening, night time, at Star Hill. I'd been told to go out there, so I was on my own.
Right.
And
when they told you to go out, did you usually say, okay, I'm going out by myself, or would you sometimes take people with you?
No, I have taken people. Yeah, I've taken people, and I couldn't take just anybody, but there's probably, I would say, 3 people that asked if they could go, and I said that they could. but sometimes I don't think it must be something to do with energies or something. I really don't know, or whether it's not. Perhaps at times got to be right for people to see these things. I really don't know. I don't understand that bit.
Right.
But more often than not, when I'm told to go, I just got up
And you just go
and went.
Yeah.
So this bright star, it came down from the sky. It came over the top of Scratchbury Hill. I was at the bottom, because Middle Hill, which is the one near the barn, is in front of Scratchbury Hill. And it came down, and it hovered near the ground, just a few inches above the ground. And I've got here, it was sparkling and jewel-like, and it was like enticing me to move closer.
Did it illuminate the ground? Or the
Yes.
area?
Oh yes,
Right.
it was very
Bright.
brilliant, the light that comes off it. And I walked closer to this object. And what I've got here is what happened next is a section of this glowing sphere, it grew more radiant. And from that radiance stepped two men, two beautiful looking men with shoulder length silver hair and dressed in this shiny silver clothing.
Right.
Now,
When you say silver, I mean, were these young men or old men?
well, I would, if you had to put them in human terms, the face, in human terms, you perhaps would say is about 30.
Right. So the hair colour would be slightly unusual for a 30-year-old.
Well, it's just silver for whatever reason. I don't know why, but it's silvery coloured.
Yeah.
The suits are more sort of brilliant white silver. It's not like a flat white.
Were these
It's
European?
got silver tinge.
Right. And these...
Yeah, they're always. It's a very finely chiselled face. Now I've got a picture somewhere. I might be able to bring it through later. An artist drawing of a friend of mine who's in communication with the same ones, and he done a drawing for me.
I know. Typically, they're described as being extremely good looking.
They are, yes, they are. They're finely chiselled features. Now this is the two men. Obviously, this is jumping ahead. That appeared in Area 51 when I was there with my partner. But this is what happened anyway. The taller man, he held up his hand, palm open, that's how he greets me, palm open and fingers pointing towards the sky. And in my mind I heard the word welcome. I automatically held my hand in the same way, and then he said to me, you must, this wasn't like talking to me, they were meaning the human population when he was saying this. You must open your mind, I was told, before it is too late. How do you think you will react when faced with the knowing that you have trapped yourselves? It did not have to be this way. You are fast heading towards the final stages of your transition. Energies are approaching from somewhere near the centre of your galaxy that will give you the opportunity for change. The opportunity to shift your awareness and your eternal self into a higher dimension, a higher frequency, where you will find new horizons and become part of a much larger family and play a much more responsible role in the unfolding of this universe. You are, all of you, independent sparks of consciousness from the Prime Creator, the source of all that is. We are also aware of the universal law of free will, and we will not impose ourselves upon those who do not seek for enlightenment. We are here this evening in answer to your calling, And we warn you now of the dangers your planet faces in the upcoming years. She will need your help to bring her through into the new reality, the transition into a higher frequency dimension. Too many people are still asleep, numbed into submission. They stare into their TV screens and read the headlines of their newspapers and accept their lot. He then smiled, and I noticed as he looked down a mischievous glint in his eye as he continued. And he said, "And they think you are weird. The strange boy who chases lights in the sky whilst talking of life on other planets. In the next few years we will show ourselves more in the skies, in the hope of waking up some of these lost souls, and you must play your part in the telling of this cosmic tale. Stay focused and true to yourself. Take time to meditate and concentrate your mind on your inner divine being. This will be your unfailing guide as we enter the troubled times of not only Gaia's transition, but also the up-tempo beat of control in your society. Whatever is thrown at you now, do please believe us when we tell you that they are frightened men. They need to keep the frequency down in order for their own survival. Otherwise, they will find their lives changed forever. And whether they accept their karmic debt or not, the balance sheets will need to be balanced. Yes, the ride ahead may be difficult, and that is entirely up to you and what you intend to do about the events being set into place. But the final transition will be glorious to behold." The two men looked down and smiled, and their bodies glowed silver in the dark night, and the craft, which seemed sentient itself, watched and waited for the command to allow them to re-enter. They once again held their hands, palm forward with fingers pointing to the sky, and as they stepped backwards, the craft increased its brilliance, and I knew this magical moment was about to end. They turned and walked through the radiant diamond as if blending into the essence of light. They returned from whence they had come, and the craft retreated to the starry heavens. I stood for ages, I'm not sure how long, and wondered how many of those countless suns shining in the firmament also supported life. Eventually I made my way back home, driving the car along the dark track and back to the main road, all the time scanning the sky for any sort of movement, in the vain hope of a sudden return of the radiant sphere of light. I'd met these men before, and I was quite sure we would meet again in the not too distant future, when I was never sure. And that was in 1970, so a lot of that
Was one of those individuals Telosh?
yes, Telosh and Janap, and they're the two that were at Area 51.
Right, okay. Do they often appear together?
No,
Right, okay.
no, mainly Telosh appears on his own.
So it seems like that they were telling you about profound changes that are
Absolutely.
going to be occurring on the Earth. What are your interpretations of those changes? Because I know a lot of people in the alternative media have different types of interpretations, such as it's apocalyptic, it's destructive, it's spiritual, it's ascension, or it's just even just intellectual, such as a new renaissance or the computer age. So what's your spin on this?
Yeah, and I can understand that. You know, this is an incredible thing that's happening, and
It is almost like intuitively people do understand that there are profound changes, and so there are lots of different ideas about how these changes, well, what's occurring, how that's materializing within human culture, but also there are lots of different ideas on this, and I think from our earlier conversations that you were talking that these changes are much more at a spiritual or a much more conscious or energetic level.
well, yes, it's energetic. I mean, lots of people today, I mean, because of the state of the world now, with the control on the planet and what is happening to poor Gaia, who is holding on a far, far greater being than what we could ever be at this stage. People are saying, well, if there's good guys out there, where are they? Why aren't they here helping us? Why can't they stop these bad guys, etc.? Well, you cannot look towards these people as saviours, because we, as a human race,
Well, we have a responsibility.
we came here. The saviours are us saving ourselves. We should be in control of this planet, and people are waking up to this. A lot of people came here for this specific reason.
Do you think the world is in although it's in a terrible state, is in a better state than what it has been for a long time, in terms of that there is a gradual shift, there is a gradual awakening. So although things are not great, things are gradually getting better or moving or progressing in the right direction?
Yes, again, people might not think it is, but it is moving in the right direction. People just have to wake up to realising that there's 7.5 billion of us, and we can turn this around, and we are, because people are waking up. It might not look like it, but it is happening, and it will happen. It's already in place and happening. There's so many people around today, and all ages. This isn't like a young thing or an elderly thing, who are saying time is going so fast. It's going so quickly now. So many people have always said this, but there's so many people that make a point of saying it. People whose minds aren't open to these other things are still saying it. This is a part of the transition, because we are going from time to no time. We're going from 3D into 4D. Time does not exist as it does today, and we're starting to move between these two frequencies.
And this is going to occur within a lifetime or 2 lifetimes?
Well, I said to my mother, not in your lifetime, Mum, but in mine.
Okay.
Now, I do have a few health issues, but I still feel quite confident that it's going to happen sooner than later. It's exciting.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly excited about it. And it's important to all consciousness on this planet.
I mean, there is perhaps another way of looking at it, and this is just, could it be that it's more the progression of the soul, in terms of that once you die on this planet, that the souls will be moving back into a 3D, will be progressing to a 4th dimension? Or are we actually talking about something so profound and so different that we're talking about the reevaluation of even our 3-dimensional reality as we exist here now in the moment?
Yeah, the last bit that you've said is absolutely bang on, because it's not just about us. It's all the planets in the solar system, and it's the sun. They're all moving out of 3D reality. That's why all consciousness, as I said to my mum, it's going to affect all units of consciousness. So it's not just about individuals, it's about all life, all conscious life, which is everything, because everything is frequency, everything is light. It is all moving into the 4th dimension.
Will we retain our individuality, or will we become more telepathic, or will consciousness be kind of compressed and become more one-like, a more sense of unity?
We'll retain the essence of who we are, our mind that's been around for millions of years, and will continue to do so. I think the only time we will merge is when, if you want, the universe goes into what they call its pralaya, its inactive period. You might then go back into the mix, but you will still not lose the essence of who you are. So that's not a problem. It's just going to be in a much more refined body until it gets to a point where it's just energy, which would be like, say, the sixth dimension. Just pure energy, but it's still the essence of that person.
Is this energy self-aware?
Absolutely. The thing is, at that level, there's almost perhaps not about truly understanding. I asked Telos once about how do we truly understand what God or the source is. And he said to me, well, no one really knows exactly, but we are closer to that understanding because we've been going down the road a bit further than you.
Yeah.
I think that's probably a good way of doing it.
With Telos, I mean, does he... Obviously, he appears human for you, but is that his actual appearance, or is that just a preference in terms of how he wants to appear, or does he just appear like that for you, or does he look completely different?
Well, although he comes from the sixth dimension, he tends to have a much more refined body.
Is the essence of him man-like? I mean, are we dealing here with what I would describe as proto-humans within my own research? Are we dealing with something which is human, or is this something completely alien? And the human appearance is very superficial, but it's not really a part of what the essence of this entity is.
I've always picked up the energy of them being androgynous, really.
Again, that's found in a lot of documented literature within ufology as well. Beautiful beings, but often beings which are androgynous as well. Yeah, I think that's a very interesting idea. Do you think that they're distantly related to the human race, or even profoundly related to the human race in some way?
I'm not too sure if they're a part of the human race, but they're certainly a part of the galactic family, and ones that are a lot further down the evolutionary path that are working for the light. As he's always saying, we have to put light into the darkness, but you do need to experience both sides. Certainly in 3D, we need to have those two different parts pulling against each other, because that's growth. That's how we learn and make decisions, etc.
But it's a matter of having an equilibrium, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's a very interesting experience. I mean, obviously that must have confirmed what you already knew at this stage already, because you'd had multiple experiences. But did this add a new layer to your understanding, or did this change you in some way? Or was it almost like, wow, I've always known this, but now here is the confirmation? Did it change anything in your life?
No, I think what it does, all these experiences just drive me onwards
to the next
the next experience. That is my journey. I'm always looking for that next moment.
So is there a reason or timing behind this in terms of propelling you to do the next thing or
it's all
project?
about timing.
Yeah, so for example, they were very interested in you educating the human race, and obviously that comes down to you writing your book and getting these incredible experiences out and talking about this and communicating about this. Were there any other experiences which were very similar in terms of which they relayed very profound, very spiritual information?
Yes, I mean, there was many since 1970, but I mean, I think also with time factors here.
Yeah.
One of the next major ones happened in 1994, and at the time I was having trouble with this back injury that I have, and I had been sleeping on a double mattress in the living room on the floor. It was winter time. I had the coal fire lit, My neighbour used to come up and light the coal fire for me because I had trouble bending.
Right.
But the point is, once my back had recovered, it could take about 4-6 weeks, I couldn't go back to the bedroom, and I found this really unusual. I simply could not go back to the bedroom, and I used to drag this double mattress back into the bedroom in the morning, bring it back out again in the evening, and I kept saying to myself, look, this is ridiculous, you've got to keep making it up, and I'm making it and making it up. So I tried to go back to bed in the bedroom, and I would come out in an incredibly hot sweat, panic almost. I never understood it. So I just gave in to it, and I carried on sleeping in the living room. And then one morning, it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, I can't remember the exact time, it'll be in the book, but I woke up. Now when I have these experiences, I always wake up instantly, and I never wake up drowsy. So when I wake up like this, apart from sensing something's going to happen, it's because of also that waking up with such a clarity of mind. This was one of those moments, and I knew something was going to happen, so I sat myself up and leant against the armchair behind me, just staring into the dark with excitement, wondering, anticipation, what is going to happen. And then all of a sudden, this golden funnel, almost like a trombone, the way it opened out, came through the window. The small part of it was still outside, but the big part, the trombone part, was in the living room. Well, I looked at this, I'd never seen something like this before, and I was thinking, what the heck is happening here?
I just think it might be a portal or something.
Well, that's what I thought at first, yes. And I sat there looking, and then 2 golden beings started to come out the funnel.
Humanoid.
Well, you couldn't tell at that point, because they looked
They were
only about that long, because they were
Right.
inside the funnel. But the interesting thing is, once they were going to come out of the funnel into the room, they were about 6'2", 6'3", but it was instant. You couldn't see it happen. And I was almost laying down. I had my head now against just the back of the chair. And they came over and hovered over me. And that's when I sensed that it was like a female and male energy.
And they were still in a light form at this point.
They were in a shape of a person.
Right.
Brilliant gold, like the funnel. Just brilliant gold colour. Incredibly bright. Their faces were so finely chiselled, it was almost like it was marble that had been created by some master's hand.
So we're dealing here again with similar types of beings, but maybe at a different energetic level.
Yes, absolutely. And their faces were just a couple of inches from my face, and I couldn't stop looking at these incredible faces. And then they just went into my body, they merged into my body. Now as soon as they'd done that, before they'd done that, sorry, I'm losing myself here. Before those 2 beings came out the funnel, stars came out the funnel, hundreds of little stars, and started dancing around the top of the ceiling. And then out of the funnel came numbers and symbols.
What did
And
these?
like letters.
Were they triangles and circles and those types?
Well, they were.
Combinations.
It was a couple of years later that I saw some ancient script that looked very similar, and I'm trying to think what the language was now.
Sumerian, Akkadian,
From the
Inca.
from the Palestine sort of area. Well, it was very similar, but I had no idea what it meant. And then they were dancing all around the ceiling. That's when these beings came out. So they merged inside me. And as soon as they went inside me, the energy was just incredible. That I just sort of went, oof, as it came in. It almost knocked me out with this energy. But then I started to see this brilliant white light, the most brightest white light I've ever seen. And I somehow knew I was going to go into this light, and I thought to myself, there's no way I'm going to go into this white light. I'm not worthy to go into such a place.
So it was all a very holy light almost.
Well, I suppose that's how it was coming across to me. It was so incredibly pure and brilliant.
That you felt you might defile it if you...
Well, or explode or something, it might be too much for me.
So,
but into this light I went. I couldn't stop myself.
Right.
But once I was in this light, I'd gone into, and I can only describe it as complete and utter oneness, because there was no separation. It was coming across like there was no inside, there was no outside. It was all just one. It was like complete and utter oneness. And shortly after that, because I remember thinking, well, is this God? Am I in the source? And then I started to become aware of something else. But this something else was behind, like, the white light. It was like this something else was holding it all together.
So it was bigger.
It was bigger, and I thought, well, if this is the source, I remember thinking, what is this something else? And then, the more I sort of merged into this, I realised that this something else that was holding it all together was love. It was simply love with capital letters. What then came across to me, that everything that originally comes into existence comes from love. And perhaps that's what is how we see
it binds the universe together in a very literal
God,
sense.
or the source. Yes, love is at the back
of everything.
of everything. Yeah. Now what we do with that, obviously, once we come out, as we've seen on this earth, is all perhaps, but it's all a learning experience. This is what people mustn't forget. It's all experience, and we're probably, as a global consciousness, creating this reality anyway.
Yeah.
And now we've got quantum physicists and that are talking of a hologram. Well, it might well be. I don't know. There's a lot for us to know.
Do you think that these were angelic beings, or do you think that the type of phenomenon that you were experiencing in the past have been attributed to angels? So do you think that they're one and the same thing in terms of what you experienced?
Well, you could call them angels, but they seem so I don't know how highly evolved truly angelic beings are, but these beings were beyond anything I'd encountered before. They seemed so close to the source. It was almost like it was the source, and it was coming to me in the female and
the
male energies.
Why do you think they felt the need that they needed to show you this oneness?
Well, I don't know, but what they did say is, after I experienced that, I came out of this white light and back onto the bed, and they said to me that all the knowledge, I don't know whether this is quite correct, but they said all the knowledge in the universe, they might mean our universe, is in these symbols.
Right, that's very profound.
Now, I remember Madame Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine sort of saying that in one symbol there could be 50 books. If you knew how to read the symbols, and there's 7 keys to read in the Bible. The first key is just the very basic stuff. And she said that the most highly trained people on this planet cannot turn that key more than 3 or 4 times and there was another 3 times to go after that. You know, so symbols obviously can contain a lot of our limited use of words.
Yeah, I believe that. In terms of my own study, I believe that symbols are encyclopedic. So we're not just dealing with one meaning, but we're dealing with multiple meanings, and they're context dependent. And so it's often meaningless to talk about symbols unless you're actually dealing with context, because otherwise it's just gibberish, and you do have to have a context in which that symbol is actually read and the way in which it's interpreted and understood. So I think that in itself is very fascinating, what you were saying about the symbols.
Well, they said it was going to go into my mind, and at some point in the future, it hasn't happened yet, I will understand the meaning of these symbols, and they said they could trigger it if the time is right, or my higher self could trigger the meaning. Right. But as I say, it hasn't happened yet.
Are they talking about one lifetime? Because you see...
Well, they're in a different time.
Yeah.
Time, you know.
When they say it could happen in the future, you might be thinking it might happen next Wednesday, but they could be talking about 300 years' time.
Or 3,000 years' time. Yeah. Don't know.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's a fair point. So, again, that was another amazing experience. Was there any... Did you take away anything from that? Did you walk away from that being a changed person in terms of that?
No, they don't change me. Well, what they do is it's another experience that
it's another facet.
Moves me forward. Well, what's the next experience? If I've just experienced that, what's the next experience? But getting back to that funnel, some years later I read a book by Dolores Cannon called The Custodians, and in that book she says that Dolores Cannon, for those that possibly don't know, I mean she's passed away now, but she regressed people all over the world. In fact, I had a regression with her. But she said that she came across too many times to be coincidence of a golden funnel that either came down out of the sky or came into the room. You might be lying on a couch or a bed, and out of that funnel came numbers and letters and symbols. Now, how fascinating is that?
That is fascinating, particularly now that we know that they contain the keys to the entire universe.
That's right, yes.
And again, you were told directly that you would actually, literally you were being told that you would understand the universe, really.
Yes, but perhaps when we go into, not 4D, I don't think, but if we go into perhaps 5 or 6D, and I think obviously that understanding, that total understanding,
will be triggered.
Would be there. Yeah, I'd love it to happen now, of course, but
when the time is ready. So I know, following on from this, I think it was a year afterwards approximately, that you had some hypnosis in order to try and understand this experience better, and you actually wrote some symbols.
Yes, well, that was some years later, after I'd been to the conference in Nevada. Well, just before that happened, in 2003, I had an experience where I met Telosh up the lane where I used to live. And the interesting thing about it was the 8th of November 2003, which was the Harmonic Convergence Day, for those that can remember. So this is what I wrote down after this experience. I received an email this morning from my friend Laura. She informed me that today was Harmonic Convergence Day, a time when all planets are in a line, and was a good opportunity to ask for changes in your life. She said she had been in touch with her spiritual guide, and he advised her that the best time for me to do this was between 3 to 5 p.m. in the afternoon. But he insisted. I have to be very careful what I ask for. I wasn't too sure what to think of this, and I continued working on the computer. But time, as I've got here, when working on the computer, it seems to pass by the most amazing speed. And when I next looked at my watch, I was astonished to see that it was already 3:40 p.m. and 4 hours of my life had simply disappeared in a moment. And I wrote here, I needed some fresh air fast, and thinking about what Laura had said earlier in the email, I decided to take a stroll up the lane. It is a most beautiful, quiet country lane. An occasional car may pass, but usually I'm left alone to listen to the birds and sheep while generally tuning in to the solitude and peace that such a place conveys. I reached the bench at the crossroads, which is halfway along the journey, and I sat down, and it was now 4:10 p.m. And thinking about what Laura had said, I closed my eyes and tuned in. After about 5 minutes, I suddenly felt a presence to my right-hand side and opened my eyes. I was astonished to see Telos, my space brother, standing beside me, because normally if he's going to come, I will sense that he's coming. I had no idea at all, so it was a bit of a surprise. He was glowing with energy, and I could feel the universal love that he seemed to carry with him as part of his own self. He pointed to the other side of the lane, and my vision followed. Then, to my amazement, a sort of energy portal opened. It was oval in shape, about 7 feet in height and 5 feet in diameter, and hovered about 1 foot off the ground. If hovered is the word. It sort of rippled with energy. There only 3 months later, I was to see a similar device at Area 51 in Nevada. But Telos looked at me, and with great compassion, he said that I could walk through this energy portal now and leave this life forever and return to my true homeland. I thought for a moment and then wondered about Fran, my partner. How could I just disappear without telling her what had happened? And anyway, I really felt that I had more to do here on Earth, such as writing this book and talking to people, and Fran is also a part of that journey. I looked at Telos and started to tell him what I was feeling, but he already knew, and smiled that smile that melts a million suns. Telos moves me to tears without doing anything. I told him I had to stay and finish off what I came here to do. He said if I stay, then I would experience the coming changes and be of great help to people, but there was a downside. He told me that I would have an unpleasant death due to the conditions of the planet and suffer much personal pain. I thought about this for a while, but kept to my original decision. But I said, I want a sign. I want a sign so obvious that I cannot fail to see it, and that sign will tell me that I have made the right decision. Because I was thinking about this, and I had this back problem, and I thought, well, the pain might be connected to the back. Well, I'd learnt to live with that since I was 16. That wasn't a problem anymore. But since those days, I've developed this neurological problem where I've lost all feeling in my legs and feet, and other things have come because of that. But shortly after I made this decision, the doorway of that portal closed. The entry to my home world was gone. And I did actually feel a slight pain as it did so. And for just one moment, I wondered if I'd done the right thing. But on reflection, I knew I had. I turned back towards Telos and found him looking back at me. The universe was in his eyes, and I wondered how many marvels those eyes had seen. And he said again, I'm never far away. Then he started to fade before my own eyes, and in a few seconds was gone, and the lane was back to normal, whatever normal is. I scanned around at the view, and opposite me was a lone sheep looking directly at me through the metal gate, and I wondered if it had seen Telosh or the portal. Perhaps it was Telosh in one of his many disguises, who knows? But I decided at that point to close my eyes and tune in and see if anything would happen. And within 5 minutes I heard some footsteps coming along the lane, and in the next few seconds they were very close to me. I opened my eyes to see a man approaching with his dog. The dog immediately came round the back of the bench and lay down underneath. It was on one of those big long extending leads. And this man was running along saying, it's all right, it doesn't bite. The man said that the dog was scared of cars and she felt safer under the bench. I said to him, I haven't seen a car for 45 minutes and not one car has passed. And then he said the most strangest thing. He said, at 5 o'clock it can get very busy. I normally come out at 4 in the afternoon, he said, to Mr. Traffic. But for some reason I kept getting delayed. I looked down at the dog, who seemed quite at peace under the seat and didn't seem worried about all this impending traffic. He then went on to tell me he had travelled all over the world, and he said there's nowhere as beautiful as this lane, and I agreed with him and told him I'd lived here for nearly 15 years and never got bored walking up and down the same lane. So I said to him, well, where do you live? Because there's only 9 houses down here, and I'd walked up this lane 1,000 times and I'd never seen him before. And he told me he lived in the bungalow. He then went on to say that in the winter this lane can get very icy and it is difficult to drive the car down. And once again I agreed with him, and went on to say that only last winter he said he got stuck on the bend on a sheet of ice and ran to the farmer's house for assistance. Anyway, the man smiled and he said, 25 years ago, he said, I got stuck up the lane at 20 past midnight in snow and ice. And I said to my wife, I'll get out of the car and see if I can get it into the farmer's field, because he was worried that if anyone did attempt to get down the lane, he was stuck right in the middle of the lane. So he got out and he tried to push the car back through this deep snow, but it was impossible to do so. He was standing there wondering what on earth he could do, when all of a sudden these 3 girls appeared out of nowhere, and they weren't even dressed for winter. And they said to him, you all right, Pop? And he said, well, I need to get the car pushed into this field through this deep snow. Like, get in the car, they said, we'll push you. And they pushed him through this deep snow and into the field. And he got out to thank them, and they were gone. He said, and I could see up both sides of the lane, and they were nowhere to be seen. He said, I went back to the wife, and he said, those 3 girls have gone. And she said, what do you mean they're gone? They've just pushed you into the field. He said, I'm telling you, those 3 girls have gone. Now, thinking back to what I said to Telosh, I need a sign to convince me that I've made the right decision. And then he turned to me, and he said, don't you just love stories like that? And I said, well, yeah.
Lived through one, haven't you?
I said, yeah, I do. And I sat there for another 10 minutes wondering about all what he had said, because then he said, right, he said, well, I'm off now. And he walked back up the lane, which is on a slight incline. And halfway up that incline, he sort of turned round and said, I'll let you know if I see the 3 girls. And off he went. And I was sitting there and I was thinking, well, how bizarre was that? And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, I've just asked for a sign and I need it to happen straight away to convince me. And this man appears with this strange story with these 3 girls, etc., and then wanders off. He lived in one of these 9 houses. I'd never seen him before.
Is there a bungalow, or was there?
There was a bungalow, but he didn't live in it.
Right.
I knew all the people that lived in them. So
It was a mystery.
it was a mystery. Yeah, what had happened there? But apparently I had the chance to go back home and.
When it closed, was it because you'd made a decision, or was it just that you didn't make the decision quick enough?
No, I made the decision that I didn't want to go through it,
Okay.
and then it closed.
Then it closed. Right.
But the odd time, I didn't know I was going to get all these other neurological issues, and it has been quite a journey dealing with it.
Could you see what was through the portal?
No, it was just like moving
Water.
energy, wavy lines, just like the one in Nevada. And I do often think now, if I'd realised what was going to happen to my body, I may have gone through it, and I thought that if it ever happened again,
Right.
I'd probably die through head first. But I don't know, I might not, because the times we're living in, and
Yeah.
it seems a bit silly to have been here all this time
Not to have seen it through.
and not seen it through.
That's a fascinating story. I think it's kind of it's sort of like something supernatural happens, and then it's followed on with something else which is supernatural. But also, he has this supernatural edge, this man who doesn't live in the bungalow, but he's also talking about something that supernaturally occurred to him. Could it have been a ghost? Was he wearing?
Was he Telosh? Because Telosh had already gone.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You just don't know.
No.
I mean, I was thinking, was he a ghost from the past? I mean, was he wearing old-fashioned clothes?
Yeah,
or?
it's the synchronicity of it.
But the type of lead that you're talking about is relatively recent in type of invention, isn't it?
Yeah, but you could do whatever you wanted, I suppose, if you...
Telosh can in terms
Telosh,
of...
if it was Telosh, or...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that had crossed your mind that it was Telosh. Kind of just saying, look...
Well, knowing he was the tiger and
everything
you know,
else.
everything else.
I mean, have you thought about the connection between what you're seeing and the jinn? Have you thought that Telosh may be what would have been referred, let's say, in Saudi Arabia as...
Yeah, I'm
as
quite
the
aware
jinn?
of the jinn and who they are,
Yeah.
but no,
No.
it's not a jinn. No.
Right, okay. Is that just something that you intuitively feel or know? Or?
Yeah, well, I've just known him too long.
You describe him as your brother, a space brother. I think that's a really interesting choice of words. Is this in a figurative sense, or are we really dealing here at a literal level?
No, I'm just using that. I've always used that as a word to try and explain the closeness
You're sort of very profound.
that we have, because it's an energetic thing.
Right.
But
See, I'm thinking of it. I don't want to... The problem is always language and people. It's like when we said earlier about angels, and people have ideas about angels which aren't necessarily true. So again, we get limited with language and we trip up with language. I know in cases of witchcraft that they would refer to familiars or familiar spirits, and again that's because the familiar was familiar, and in fact so familiar that they were family-like, hence the connection between the etymology. And so I think this idea that you describe him as a space brother, not necessarily in the literal sense of the word, but more in terms of that deep emotional connection that you have with this individual. Is it only with this one individual, or do you have that same deep connection with the other beings that you've seen in terms of his partner as well? You mentioned that sometimes.
what, Janap?
Shinap, yeah.
I don't feel the closeness
No.
to Janap.
Do you think Janap is paired up with somebody else in...
Well, he appears with Telosh. He doesn't appear...
Yeah, I was
Not
just
with
thinking,
Telosh.
is he paired up with a different human being, for example?
Well, I think it's connected to Fran
Right, okay. Has she seen him, or...
in Nevada,
Right.
but not as Janap.
Right. Shall we lead on to the Nevada story, or is there anything else that you really want to go over?
No, we probably could go into that at this
Or
point.
is there anything else that you want to cover before the Nevada story?
Well, we could always go back, I suppose, but I think this might take us up to the time if I do go through that.
Yeah, that would be fine, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.